When two superstars like Vidit Gujrathi and Aryan Tari meet, you know there's a pretty good chance we might have something special ahead. And they didn't disappoint in round 9 at the FIDE Chess.com Grand Swiss. After playing what is some pretty well-known topical theory here, the two players deviated when Aryan Tari chose to move rook f to d8, rather than the more standard move rook a to c8 that's been played many times. Now the reason this is important and the reason this is the place I chose to start the video is because while this move is logical and puts the rook behind the passed d-pawn, it's also probably the move that can ultimately be to blame for the brilliant tactic that Vidit comes up with in a couple moves. Now, that's not totally true because after the move queen to b3, Aryan Tari could have played the move rook a to c8, practically transposing into all of those common theoretical roads I mentioned. But instead, he plays the move queen a6, and if you want to pause your video and try to dissect between the lines what I've been foreshadowing about the move rook f d8 and why it could be a probably a dubious novelty rather than one that we'll see repeated, now's your chance to do so. If you haven't, here we go. Vidit played the move knight takes f7, a move that, again, is kind of a key tactic here, especially based on the fact that this rook no longer guards the f7 square, no longer guards the king side at all, actually. And after the move, king takes f7, probably bishop takes, by the way, was better, allowing a variation where Vidit has just won a pawn. We get more brilliance, more attacking spectacularness with the move rook takes e6. Now, this is a rook sack to make your parents proud. You bring the king into the center, play c5 check, which forces king d7, and despite being down a rook with total dominance over the light squares here, both bishop and queen about to dominate their respective diagonals, this position should have been over very quickly. Unfortunately, from here on out, we get a few mistakes by both players, but if Vidit had played the move knight to e4, this game would have been over in not more than a few moves later. After knight takes e4, the main point is that bishop takes can be played, and this king just has nowhere to run. Things like king c8 allow bishop to f5 check, and queen in to either e8 or e7 if you try to defend the check, and black's position is completely falling apart. There's all kinds of other variations I analyzed over at my blog just to show some fun points. For example, if the rook comes to f8, now bishop f1 comes with a tempo, unlike it did in the game, an even stronger tempo, because after d3, knight takes f6, and then bishop takes, there's no longer a rook on this file. When the queen moves, it's time to take on b7 and win the house on a8. So, again, there's more variations to prove the attack, but knight e4 would have been a really fun way to see this finished off. So Vidit doesn't go for this. Instead, he played bishop f1, and after d3, he still had a great attack, so don't close the book on it yet. But after knight to d4, we can already see that Gujrathi is not going to be able to just put this game away. We're going to be heading to an endgame where, yes, white will have compensation for the sacrificed exchange after you win back a piece, but no longer the forced mates we were hoping for after knight takes f7 and rook takes e6. So Gujrathi goes for it. Bishop takes a6. Now, the key reason why you win the exchange is because you have an intermezzo here, bishop b5 check to safeguard the minor. Then, after recapturing the piece here, white has 2 pawns for the exchange and still an attack on the king. So a worthy sacrifice. White is clearly better here, but again, not the checkmate we hoped for. A few more logical moves by both sides. We get an endgame where time pressure, is beginning to set in for both players. a4, knight to d2, a3. Tari gets big credit here for not folding lightly, doing everything you can when you have dysfunctional development, like a king still sitting between your two rooks. You lack that normal kind of communication from the towers. Doing your best to justify their current position is one strategy out of that, right? So when we think of the opening, our king is in the center, we often solve that by castling. When that's not an option, usually you want to look for the most accurate ways to use your pieces where they stand, and that's what Tari has done here by rushing the a-pawn. So that's a nice thing we can learn there from the Norwegian Super GM. After b takes, rook takes, he's in the game. The bishop comes back to f1, but after the move b5, this is when the game should have been over for the second time here, but time pressure still being of the issue here. Vidit misses another win by force, which would have been bishop h3 check. And the point is, after the king has to go to b7, c6 check is a position that wins the rook on a3 because black can't take both the pawn and the bishop at the same time. So king takes, white would have just been up a piece. Kind of funny to choose this game. I mean, it was an amazing game with knight f7, rook takes e6, but definitely not a perfect game by either player given that we had these missed opportunities. But nonetheless, c takes b6 is played. And the reason this is crucial is we don't just point out those missed wins to, rub salt in anyone's wounds. That's not the point. But the issue is that if black had now played the position maybe perfectly from here, it's not 100% certain that white was winning by force. So those missed opportunities could have hurt. Knight to c4 was played, bishop d4, rook to b1. And here, for some reason, Tari doesn't take on f2 with check first and then take the bishop. If he had gone for a position like this is just like what would have happened in the game, except that you've actually gotten and won this f2 pawn, instead of in the game where after rook to b1, black took on d6, and then after knight e4 was no longer able to get this pawn. Now, I think the key point is Tari went for this because he was hoping to meet bishop c4 with rook takes f2. He wanted to keep that idea alive, but still, hindsight shows that bishop takes f2 was probably best. So, when he misses that, he kind of misses his last chance to really hold this game. After rook d1, and then knight g5, the knight comes into e6. Vidit is able to bring the threats to the 7th rank. And even if the best moves were found instead of things like rook to e4 with king to b8, rook c7, rook c6, and then bishop b5, followed by knight c5 are probably pretty good for white, as I analyzed. But instead, Tari played rook e4, allowing knight takes g7 and just resigned, because after bishop takes, he clearly missed that he was going to lose that piece on the next shot. So again, a really exciting game, an instructive one, just if we go back to the critical moment of when rook fd8 was first played, when you had this opportunity to play knight takes f7. Sometimes the way you see these tactics is just by asking yourself, what are the literal differences between the move order my opponent played and what the theory says? And just try to point out where the pieces are to yourself and see if there might be tactical opportunities that don't normally exist. Vidit was able to find those here and ultimately could have won the game in brilliant fashion, but still did win the game with a very, very nice one from start to finish. Thanks for watching this, and if you're watching the broadcast, back to everybody in the studio. If you're watching this on social media, guess what? This is my chance to remind you that you still have a chance to tune in and see who's going to take the spot for the candidate. So many top players competing there. It's going to be a huge finish, a huge maybe tie at the top of the standing. Should be a super exciting ending there on the Isle of Man. And I'll see you on Chess.com either way.